Well, welcome to Tim's Take, and today we have a special guest is Dr. Pat Westhoff. He's the director of the Food Agriculture Policy Research Initiative, or FAPRI. And this is not only a Missouri treasure, but a nationwide, because you all work with Capitol Hill.
We keep busy running around the country and a lot of time in D.C.
All right, and you're the folks that we look to. What are the markets going to do? But let's look at the big picture first. We've had what? Demand from all what you shared with me. If you took China and ethanol out, our grains are pretty been flat, haven't they, for the last 30 years?
Right. If you add up all the grains and oilseeds that people produce in the world, if you take out ethanol and take out China, the net change in the per person consumption of those grains and oilseeds is basically zero over the last 40 years.
Wow. But now our population is going up.
Right.
So that's what's the only thing that's really increased demand other than livestock in China and ethanol production.
That's right.
In the United States.
And of course, population growth is slowing.
Right. It is. It is. So, and we're setting ourselves up maybe for some cliffs, aren't we?
There's some challenges ahead. So what's going to be the new engine of growth? We're going to have more demand in the future. Where's it going to come from is the big question mark right now.
Because yields are going up.
Yields continue to go up.
Our colleagues are doing a fantastic job in improving yields.
Indeed, here and around the world.
Right. And United States, we kind of like to beat our chest, say we feed the world, but there's large players out there that we have to contend with how their crops are doing.
That's right. We are and continue to be a very major player, but the South American countries, some places in Europe and Australia, et cetera, are also very important parts of the global picture. And South America in particular has been growing very dramatically over the last couple of decades.
And do you see that growth in South America is going to level off, or is that going to continue?
I think the growth rate in Brazil will slow down eventually, but probably not in the near term. We're going to continue to see continued growth in Brazil in particular for quite some time to come.
It's not just soybeans either in
That's
Brazil.
Right. Yeah, Brazil's learned how to double crop soybeans and corn, so their corn production has increased dramatically. They were actually the leading global exporter of corn a couple of years ago.
Oh my goodness! And again, the growth in China in livestock. So, is there another China out there that will be converting more into high protein food sources?
There's no other country as big as China, right? Obviously, until last year, it had the largest population in the world. Some other countries in Southeast Asia are seeing some of the same types of demographic transitions,
like Malaysia or Indonesia.
Yeah, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam. All countries have seen very rapid growth in their domestic consumption of meat, and that's caused increased demand for grains and oilseeds around the world. But they're much smaller countries.
Sure. And India, who's number one now, they're not going to probably be that big meat consumers.
Yeah, unless there's a huge change in things in India, we don't expect India to become a major meat consumer. There is some chicken consumption in India, and there's a lot of egg consumption and especially milk. India is actually number one consumer of milk in the world.
Oh, wow.
So there is indeed some demand from the part of the livestock sector there. But India continues to be a net exporter of rice and a net exporter of wheat. So they're just not the big source of demand that people might have guessed they would be 30, 40 years ago.
Oh, wow. So like you're saying, we got to continue to find new markets or new uses. Well, the other concern is that with ethanol being our major sort, our corn has taken a lot of our excess corn,
right?
Ethanol. But if we do go more electric, that's going to reduce that, isn't it?
Right. So if you look ahead of us, we don't expect to see much increase in the near term in consumption of gasoline and therefore not much consumption of ethanol. And in fact, once you get maybe a few years down the road, we actually declining consumption of gasoline as electric vehicles become more common. This is not going to change the world overnight. We're not going to have everybody driving electric vehicles in 5 years' time. But as you look into the farther future, this could be a very big factor for the ethanol industry.
So as you mentioned, that we may have to get higher blends.
Right.
That may offset some of that.
Right. So if we can make it possible, make it desirable for people to use at least 15% blends, and of course even the flex fuel vehicles use up to 85% blends, would be very helpful for keeping ethanol consumption sustained for some time.
And once that goes away, we may have to even look for different type of markets and uses.
So one that's been talked about, of course, is sustainable aviation fuel. So if it's possible to turn ethanol and or biodiesel into an aviation fuel, that could be another potentially large market. There's been brave talk of billions of gallons of this product in the not terribly distant future. We're not there yet.
Right.
But the economics are not very strong right now. It would require probably policy to make that occur. But that is something, some people are very hopeful for.
Well, I've heard folks even mention that ethanol as a source of hydrogen if we go that route.
Right, right.
So there's a lot of unknowns out there still.
There's continue to be lots of unknowns that make this business very fun.
It really does. And you touched on biodiesel. You got soybeans that we think of, but looking at your charts, soybeans aren't the major driver for biodiesel.
Right. We have lots of other stuff we use to make biodiesel and to make renewable diesel, a distinct product that can be substituted completely for diesel fuel in any vehicle.
And that's like sunflowers, canola.
Yeah, so it's canola oil, but it's also yellow grease, leftover stuff from cooking oil, and that sort of thing has also been widely adopted. Tallow, can be made into that product, and that's happened in a major way.
So our animal byproducts can be also.
We're even importing some of those animal products, in fact, to make
Is that right?
To make renewable diesel. Yes.
Well, I saw that figure that you showed of the United States and how there's so much growth in the biodiesel refineries. So that's still a huge area to grow.
Yes, if you look ahead of us right now, it is the major source of growth and demand for all vegetable oils, including soybean oil. We're already at the stage now where we have about as much soybean oil being used for renewable fuel production as is used for all the purposes combined.
Wow. Is the oil demand driving soybean market?
We still have most of the value of the soybean coming from the meal, as has always been the case, but it's a much narrower gap than it has been historically. And in fact, there are years where we've had almost the same value from the oil as from the meal.
I guess early in our career, soybean oil was the byproduct,
right.
And now it's one of the major drivers.
Right. So we used to figure how we're going to get rid of all that soybean oil, and now we may have the opposite problem if we have really rapid growth and demand for soybean oil to make renewable diesel. That what we tell the meals can become the question.
Sure. But that's a good feed source for our livestock.
Right.
But our livestock numbers, we're the lowest since the early 60s on beef cattle.
We have a lot lower cattle numbers than we would have anticipated. Drought will do that to you, right?
Right. But the price is high.
Price is high right now, so it's about the only major commodity where prices are higher than they were a couple of years ago, and they're probably expected to continue to be higher for the next couple of years. So that's the one really bright picture in the overall ag commodity front.
Do you see, like you mentioned, some of the Southeast Asian countries, the United States shipping them a finished product or the raw materials such as corn to feed their own?
Yeah, both. I mean, we're seeing increased exports of meat and meat products, but we're also seeing increased exports of the feeds.
Okay, but poultry is the one that's pretty consistent. We still have a lot, and it's actually creeping up, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, poultry production, not just here but around the world, is increasing at a very healthy pace. Not as fast as it did 10 or 15 years ago, but still at a healthy pace going forward.
Because it's probably the efficiencies of them. They can turn that grain into meat a bit more efficient than beef or pork. And pork is holding its own, you would say? Pork
has been holding its own in general in this country. We've had a big increase in our pork exports over the last couple of decades. That's leveled off this past year. It's one of the reasons why pork prices are off a bit right now is because our exports are not as strong as they were. But that has we've become a major exporter of pork, of chicken, and holding our own on beef in most years.
And dairy is sliding, isn't it?
Dairy has lower prices right now by far, no question about that.
About 25% or so?
We're down from over $25 a hundredweight in 2022 to around $20 last year and about the same probably this year. Export demand for what was once a U.S.-only product, we now export a lot of our dairy products, has gotten a bit weaker this past year. More competition from other countries, not quite as much demand from China and elsewhere.
Yeah, I've heard that they even say that we have too many dairy cows in this country.
Again, depending on what you mean, right? So obviously, if you have a little bit lower supplies, you'd have higher prices. The demand for dairy products tends not to be terribly price responsive in a short period of time. So that means that a relatively small change in supplies can result in a big change in price. So we had a relatively small change in production between 2022 and 2023, but with demand getting a little bit weaker, prices fell off pretty hard.
Oh, wow. My daughter lives in southern Wisconsin. And for the last 12 years, I've noticed fewer and fewer dairies.
Yes. Yeah, a lot fewer dairies, but almost as many cows. I mean, the actual number of cows in Wisconsin hasn't changed that much. The number of dairies has definitely come down.
And it seems like the ones that are in business still, they're driving 20 and 30-year-old trucks and tractors. They haven't made any money for a while.
I'm from a dairy farm in Northeast Iowa. I still have some uncles and cousins who are still in the dairy business.
And so you know their struggles.
I know the struggles, and they are very severe struggles.
Wow. So that's kind of the big picture. So let's focus now on what about here in the upcoming year or two with our grains, for example, corn.
Right. So again, as always, weather matters, right? So you tell me what the weather's going to do this summer, and I'll tell you a lot more about what the prices are going to be. Okay. But if we were to have average weather conditions here and around the world, we might actually see an increase in production for a lot of crops in 2024. We had, subnormal weather last year in this country and in many other countries too last year. So just getting back to the longer term trend on yields would mean more production and probably some downward pressure on prices. So when we do our projections, since we don't know what the weather is going to be, we tend to assume as our starting point, let's see what happens if we impose average weather conditions in front of us. Doing that results in a bit lower corn price, a bit lower soybean price in 2024 than we saw in 2023.
But so this spike that we had a couple of years ago,
right.
That was all weather related and that sort of thing.
It wasn't just weather, but it was Ukraine. The war in Ukraine, obviously, limited supplies by a very major competing exporting country. We had relatively strong demand around the world as well during that period of time. And some speculation occurred about what might happen. How bad was the situation in Ukraine going to prove to be? Were they going to be able to export at all? Would Russia's exports be affected? There's tons of uncertainty there for a while. Some of that, still remains. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with the war and how it's going to affect Ukraine's ability to export. But we have learned that Ukraine can find a way to export at least some products today. Russia's exports have not been affected in any noticeable way. In fact, they had record exports last year for their grains.
So they can, if Ukrainian wheat gets reduced or sunflower, they do a lot of sunflowers. Right. You can make it up in other ways, and that drives our other commodity prices up. Just a
reminder, the world's a big place, right? So it's not just what happens there. How big is the Brazilian crop? How big is our crop? Argentine crop, et cetera, around the world will end up driving those global supplies that matter.
Wow. So projections are we're going to be a little bit less, and production costs they're starting to level off, aren't they? Fertilizers came down a little bit, but machinery costs are still there. Land values, land rent is fairly flat, maybe going up a little bit.
That's right. Yeah, we've seen some costs come off. As you said, fertilizer is off quite a bit from the peak in 2022. So that's one big positive for especially corn and other producers of crops that use a lot of fertilizer. But most other costs are remaining pretty high. And interest costs, of course, have been very high this past year. Those will be a bit less in 2024, we hope, as interest rates come down.
Right.
But not yet. I mean, so far we still have those high interest rates.
One thing I've heard from folks like yourself say to farmers, if you lock your price in that you're going to sell, make sure you lock your input prices in too.
Right.
That's where sometimes folks forget about.
Right. Yeah. If you're trying to manage risk, you have to make sure you're thinking about all the risks that you have. Right. And yes, you can actually get yourself in trouble if you just lock in one side of that picture, because quite often the prices for what people sell and for what they buy tend to move together. Not perfectly all the time, obviously, but typically if you have a very high corn price, it will also go along with having pretty high fertilizer prices. So if you just do one side of the picture, you get yourself in trouble if you're not careful.
Are profits staying about the same then overall?
We had, for the crop sector as a whole, we had pretty good profits in 21 and 22, in spite of the very high production costs. Commodity prices increased so much that it more than offset the big run-up we had in production costs for the average producer. Obviously, different situation for different people, different places. When we come into the 23 crop and the crop coming up in 2024, we're expecting lower returns because prices for the commodities are coming down more than production costs are coming down. Those returns don't remain too bad compared to where we were, say, in 2020 and the years before that, but much, much lower than we saw in the 21 and 22 period.
So corn, soybeans, if weather is going to be average, and we got to think the whole world being average, not just the United States or the Midwest. We play on worldwide markets. Right. How about wheat? Wheat's been kind of it didn't enjoy this big spike as well, did it?
Well, wheat had a big spike in prices. I mean, the price of wheat actually went to a record high.
That's right. But then it went down fast.
But it came down very hard after that. Yeah, a lot of speculation about what would happen because of Ukraine, a major exporter of wheat. People thought they weren't going to export. They were able to export some. People realized, hey, we've got a big supply of wheat around the world. Russia had a record crop, and that combination, resulted in a lot more supplies than people had anticipated. Demand for wheat is not as vibrant as demand is for a crop like corn, because wheat demand depends on human consumption pretty much, right?
Versus feed grains.
You have some feed use of wheat, but it's not a huge share of the total in most years, unless the price of wheat compared to the price of corn is way out of whack for some reason. So it has not had the sort of vibrancy as the corn market tends to have across time. It's come down really hard. We expect it to remain, quite a bit lower than it's been for some time to come.
And talking to Missouri farmers, because wheat acres in Missouri have really fallen. I think there's a little bit of an uptick because the price went up, but the answer is the profits are so small. The price is so low compared to what it should be.
Right.
And that's just because of we overproduce, I guess, worldwide.
There's a lot of production around, drives down the price. Now, again, a lot of folks are still finding double crop production of wheat and soybeans to be profitable here in Missouri, and you see that happening. Of course, that depends on whether you can get that soybean crop in and get it off.
Right,
and that's always a kind of a crapshoot each year, whether that's going to be possible or not.
But I've seen that in my career get pushed north.
Right.
I think the wheat varieties are shorter. We've bred them for that reason, for double cropping. And also the weather, I think a little bit longer growing season than we had 30 years ago. So that has pushed north, but you still don't see the wheat that we had 40 years ago.
That's right.
All right, so now how about down now? So our southern growers, the cotton and rice, where we see that going?
So cotton, it depends on the demand for cotton fiber around the world, right? And that can change a lot from year to year, not just because of the overall economy, but also because of fashion trends could even affect the demand for cotton. Are we going to shift away to other types of fibers and what people consume? Global consumption of cotton is not that different now than it was about 10 or 15 years ago, even though we've had a fair amount of population growth and income growth over that period of time. Looking ahead, are we going to see more stability in demand for cotton is one big question. And then obviously weather matters too. I mean, we had short cotton crop here last year that helped sustain cotton prices higher than they would otherwise be. We'll see what this year's crop looks like. With El Nino, that can sometimes affect cotton production. So see how that plays out in 2024. If we were to have a big crop of cotton here and in some other major producing countries, we could also be looking at lower cotton prices ahead of us.
Who competes with the United States on cotton?
There's a variety of other exporters. Australia is an exporter. Some of the West African countries are exporters. Uzbekistan used to be a major exporter, but because of their drought problems they have there with climate change, they've reduced their exports quite a bit.
Wow. So fashions are going to drive it. And do y'all at FAPRI ever get into domestic use versus, exporting raw cotton for value added versus doing it here in the United States? Do you ever get into that?
We have tried to get on top of that as best we can. In fact, a former student of ours actually did his dissertation on this very topic a few years back. You may have heard of this guy, Seth Meyer, USDA chief economist.
Yes.
Actually looked at cotton demand, not just for cotton, but fibers in general, and tried to get into all those trade-offs that are involved in what's produced where and what's consumed where. Because
that makes a big difference in our rural economy.
Yes.
And one thing that really stood out to me when I was in ALA, Ag Leadership of Tomorrow, and we were at all throughout the state of Missouri, and all those grains that and fibers produced in the boot hill were all getting on barges and heading out.
Yes. Yeah.
We missed that opportunity for that value added right here.
Yeah. There's very little mill use of cotton left in this country. We still have a couple million bales each year that's milled domestically, but the vast majority of the cotton we produce is exported. We just have not been able to compete in those after the farm gate.
Whereas our corn and soybeans, they're used quite a bit here in the United States.
Yeah, corn is primarily consumed domestically. Soybeans, it's a mix of domestic consumption and exports.
Mm-hmm. Great. How about rice now?
Rice, again, the global market of rice has been affected by some bad weather problems in Southeast Asia that helped boost prices in international markets a lot last year. That's helped keep our prices higher than we might have guessed they were going to be this past year. Once again, looking forward, if we go back to more normal types of crops, we'll probably see lower prices for rice in the year ahead.
And we're a small producer worldwide in rice.
We're a very small share of the global production of rice, but we are a significant exporter. We're not the number one exporter, number two exporter, but we're in the top 4 or 5 in most years on our rice exports.
That's kind of interesting. I'm surprised how much we import of meat, for example, and grains, and how much we export. And we're not totally 100% self-sufficient, are we?
No, we're not. On most of the major grains, we export and import very, very little, and so our exports are primarily what we do. Meats are very complicated. Beef in particular is complicated. We don't tend to import and export the same things. We're importing different cuts of meat. We tend to import hamburger-style meat. We tend to export, better quality meat. So quite often we may have, say, our quantity exported and imported may be pretty similar, but we may be a net exporter in value terms because we're exporting higher value product typically. Now, again, when we import from Canada, that's not true.
Oh, that's just kind of a wash.
Right, that's kind of a wash, yeah.
Okay, that's just, localities there.
Localities and just very particular cuts, but
Sure.
we export both high quality and low quality from them.
So what's your forecast in for the livestock?
So again, near term, we do think because of reduced cattle numbers, it's going to take a while for that to change. So we'll probably have reduced beef production again in 2024, probably in 2025 as well. So that should help sustain cattle prices at pretty high levels. Whether they go up from our current high levels, that's a different question, but at least they should be pretty high by historical standards. But at some point, this cycle will change. So if we don't have the drought conditions we've had forever and ever, we'll probably see cattle herds start to rebuild in a couple of years' time. But as you know, basic biology matters, right? So the time it takes from the time you have a calf to the time you've got a cow to the time you've got something ready to market, that takes some time to all play out.
It seems like cattle are still where it's more farmer-owned animals. And we have segregation where we have the folks that are cow-calf, and some are backgrounders, some are feedlots and such, other than like our hogs and poultry seem to have gone. What section of the cattle industry do they actually make money on?
Depends on the point of the cycle. I mean, right now, cow-calf operators who have forage should be in pretty good condition right now because feeder cattle prices have been at or near record highs. So that should mean that someone who has forage available should be doing okay. It makes it tougher for a feedlot operator. They're paying a lot for those animals coming to the feedlot. Feed prices were pretty high this past couple of years at least. So they didn't have such a wonderful year in 21 and 22. Going forward again, once that cycle starts to turn, those fortunes could change.
So would the cow-calf person be maybe the least volatile and your feedlot the most, or just depends?
It depends. I would probably say that on balance, the feedlots are going to decide what they can afford to pay for things, right? And so you wouldn't think they would be losing lots of money for very long periods of time before they would take actions to avoid that. Doesn't mean that they have stable income. If you look at their net returns, that they do jump around quite a bit. Cow-calf, it jumps around a lot. I mean, we can have very strong positive returns for cow-calf operators for a period of time and then negative returns for a period of time as well.
Because like right now with high prices, I could try to get more into the cow-calf, but by the time they hit the ground, the market's changed.
That's right. So if you decide you want to become a cow-calf operator today, starting from scratch, by the time you've got an animal ready to sell, you can't count on the market being where it is right now.
Or just expand my herd.
Right.
Whereas feedlot, I think what you're saying, if grain prices are too high, I don't have to feed as many.
Right.
I can cut down, but right. if it's a good balance right now, I can make a lot of money quick.
That's right.
I can really start feeding. And your backgrounders are kind of in between that.
Yeah, and when we talked about a crop producer trying to decide to buy inputs versus selling their outputs and how to hedge those, think about a feedlot operator. If they're playing their game to minimize their risk, they're going to be very careful about hedging the cost of the animals they're buying and the cost of the feeds they're going to buy.
How does that new slaughterhouse in the St. Louis area going to affect our prices here in Missouri?
I can't say I know a lot about that, but my understanding is for the particular types of animals that we'll sell or purchase, I should say, yes, it should be a positive for those types of animals. It's not a huge facility. It's not going to be a night and day difference in what we do with our animals here in Missouri. Most of our cattle are still going to find their way to feedlots west of here. Okay,
but I still remember in the early 2000s when the first ethanol plant opened up within about 30 miles of here. The price of corn went up a quarter. and that was fantastic. And so we'll probably kind of see that time of effect, that we'll see that price of that, because the demand will start going up a little
Right,
bit.
you'll see a local effect. And so
Yes.
again, if you're selling the type of cattle that plant's buying, yes, it'll be a positive for the prices of those animals, no question about it. But again, most animals will continue to have to be shipped to feedlots. That'll be the main driver of our prices in the state of Missouri.
All right, great. Whereas in hogs and poultry, we could have those processing plants here,
Right.
because you don't have that long feed out.
Right.
time.
But the transportation costs are a little bit lower relative to what they are for some other types of industries. And so, yes, it matters, but how much it matters, you got to be careful not to overclaim how big a deal it's going to be.
And hogs, then outlook on them.
Hog, again, it's a more controlled market than in the case of cattle. So what do the major players decide they want to do for their own supply situation? What demand is going to prove to be? We've seen pork prices come off pretty strongly from their peaks in 2022. Of course, what happens with animal diseases here and elsewhere matters. What happens to export demand here and around the world matters a lot. We do think we're probably, on balance, going to tend to have prices that are just high enough that people can cover their costs, but not a lot more than that.
It just occurred to me that pork and poultry are a lot like oil, in that you can control how much you pump, you can control how much you do, a bit more. You can
more quickly.
Yeah, and you can control that market just
Right.
a little bit. And your ups and downs are on disease impacts or
Right.
weather, storms and the oil production.
Yeah, so if you think about poultry, if it weren't for the problems we've had with bird flu, you probably could have controlled the bird supplies to be able to keep profits at a reasonable level over time. Now, of course, avian influenza completely threw all that up for grabs there for a couple years there, and we have new problems with avian influenza even today.
A lot of consumers are talking about the price of eggs is just still high. Are they going to come down, do you think?
Well, they have come down sharply off the peak. Let's be clear about that. I mean, we have, farm level price of eggs are like half of what they were at the peak, or even less than half of what they were at the peak. But yes, they are still a bit higher than they were historically. Where we go from here again, do we avoid avian influenza problems? And what else might happen to this industry?
So just generally, the farm value goes down. Let's say eggs are half, but the consumer doesn't see that for a little bit longer. It
tends not to fall as fast or as far at the consumer levels as at the farm level. That's certainly true. But they do move together. If you look at egg prices, probably see a higher correlation between what happens at the farm level and what happens at the retail level than many other products out there. And again, it's a very vertically integrated industry too. Signals that are sent to the actual people with the houses, have to be consistent with what the market wants to have happen.